Welcome to the Church of Mabus radio show. It's Friday night. This is Jack Nicholson. It's Friday night. This is Jeffrey Pritchett.
You can't handle the truth.
Yeah, I'm gonna bang a
That's
little
pretty
bit
good
of
Jack
beaver.
Nicholson, though.
Yeah. Never rub another man's rhubarb. Anywho, you listen to United Public Radio 107.7 FM New Orleans. And just a couple of things to plug. We got Arlen Schumer here on the Twilight Zone. That's going to be really, really great. Jay's here, but I told some folks I'd plug these. Yeah, that's the book. Hold it up again, Arlen. I'll read the title to everybody before we start. The 5 Themes of the Twilight Zones, essays by Arlen Schumer.
Yeah.
And it's going to be good. But let me plug these 2 things and we'll get started. First thing I'm going to plug is Space Marine 2 from Warhammer 40,000, a new game that's coming out September 9th by Saber Interactive. Basically, the Warhammer 40,000 situation. A lot of things were inspired by it. There's a show coming of it with that Superman guy, Henry, whatever the hell his name is, the weird guy that quit The Witcher and then someone else replaced the same character. But anyway, it's Warhammer Space Marine 2. And basically, you're these religious zealot Marines taking out demonic alien scum in space. It's a shooter. But check that out. And then let's see here. This is a cool game that I've played it some. It's kind of hard, but some people are probably better at it than me. But it's called Vlad Voivod Dracula Episode 1 Manhunt. And Voivod is spelled Voievod. Vlad Voivod Dracula Episode 1 Manhunt, not manhood. It's by a guy named Tiberius, and it's on Steam, and it's basically like a kind of like Castlevania Metroid kind of game, and you're Vlad the Impaler running around impaling people. It's kind of historical. I don't think there's like fantasy in it. It's not that I know of. It's more like a historical kind of thing, like the real story. But that's on Steam. Vlad Voivod Dracula Episode 1 Manhunt. Why do I keep doing that? But anyway, let's get this show started. I've always loved the Twilight Zone. I remember seeing it as a kid with my dad. Just so many neat different things. Like I can remember the one episode where they all, thought maybe it was like aliens invaded or something, all getting paranoid with each other and, craziness breaking out, but definitely beyond its time. And I have them all on DVD. Of course, there's Blu-ray. I'll get that one year maybe, but I love it. I have some giant box set of it, and I love it. And just talking about it makes me want to go watch it. So, when did your passion for it start, Arlen? When did it begin?
The very first image I can recall seeing as a child, I must have been 4.5 years old. It had to be in early 1963 when the Twilight Zone aired the hour-long season of 18 episodes, season 4, and it was the eyeball in outer space. Mm-hmm. That is my first visual image as a child that I can remember. Now, years later, I would do the first coffee table art book about the Twilight Zone, Chronicle Books 1990, 34 years ago, and look under the dust jacket, embossed on the cloth is the white eyeball in outer space.
Awesome.
We came full circle, right? So this is my first book about the Twilight Zone, and now I have a new one coming out. But I would say that my mother was a widow. My father died when I was 4 months old. And I think I sought out my father figures in the American pop culture I grew up with in the 60s. I think Serling was a father figure. I think Sean Connery's Bond was a father figure. The superheroes I was reading in the comic books, Superman and Batman, were father figures. And eventually I became a big Bruce Springsteen fan, and he was like a father figure. I also worked for my childhood idol, one of the greatest comic book artists of the 20th century, named Neil Adams. Without Neil Adams, there would have been no Dark Knight. There'd be no X-Men franchise. Brought photorealism to superheroes. And I got to work for him when I got out of art school. Nice. So I pursued my father figures in the pop culture. And Serling had to be one of the earliest because those introductions he gave, and the whole thematic tenor of the series was very moralistic, very righteous, talking about the big issues of good and evil, God and man, man and the state, and everything in between, love, hate, evil, everything, all the big themes. And therefore, Searle came across as this avuncular father figure, handing out these moralistic lessons in the way he introduced them. Gee, he only had the greatest broadcast voice of the 20th century. Hello. And then as a visual icon in the early 60s, I think along with maybe JFK and Sean Connery, those are the three coolest guys of the early 60s in their black suits with their black thin ties, right?
Yeah,
Definitely. So tell us a little bit about Neil Adams working for him. That's awesome.
Gee, how much time you got? The rest of the podcast?
Yeah, we got 2 hours.
How much do you know about Neil Adams?
Do what now?
How much do you know about Neil Adams?
I know a little bit, not as much as you, that's for sure. Not a lot.
Gee, thanks for that understatement. Yeah, I would think since what you just said, I don't think you know as much. I got to work for the guy. If you had told me when I was 12 years old, when Neil Adams was one of the twin gods of comic book art, along with Jim Steranko, if you know that name.
I know Steranko, yeah.
They were the Beatles and the Rolling Stones of comic book art in the late 60s. So while the psychedelic era was going on in the culture and Vietnam and everything else was happening, in comic book art, mainstream superheroes, Neil Adams, Jim Steranko were the two twin gods. So if you had told me the year 1970, when they were at their peak, that one day, Arlen, you will be working for Neil Adams. You will be penciling and he will be inking your pencils. Wow. I would have had an adolescent heart attack right there.
Yeah.
All right. And I am blessed to be able to say, I got to work for Neil Adams. And then, by the way, Jim Steranko, to make a long story short, I wrote him a fanboy letter while I was at RISD majoring in graphic design. And I probably said, Jim, you're the reason, the way you work with type and design. And he invited me to Reading, looked at my portfolio, and wanted me to quit Rhode Island School of Design.
Wow.
And work as his apprentice. Now, I was in my junior year majoring in graphic design. What do you think I did? Do you think I stayed at RISD and got my degree? Or did I leave and join the circus and become Steranko's apprentice?
I'm going to say you became his apprentice.
Jeff, what do you say?
Definitely.
You think I left school and started for Steranko?
I don't really know, but Jay, I can hear a dog or something coming over you.
Well, I'm just saying, both of you think that's the decision I made.
I don't know. But probably,
is that your final answer?
I don't know.
Answer you said you thought yes. And
yes.
Jay, you thought yes too.
Yep.
Okay, so to make a long story, not that long, but I was on a half scholarship from RISD. My mother was paying the rest. I don't even know how to this day she paid the rest. And, if I was in my freshman year, I might have left and joined Steranko, but I was in my junior year. And I thought, I got to complete school and get my degree. So I've kept in touch with Steranko ever since. Whenever I see him at a comic convention, I'm so proud to show him my work, and he's proud of, where I've gone. But I am blessed and I think unique. Plenty of people have worked for Neil Adams and plenty of people have worked for Jim Steranko. He's had other apprentices. But to be able to say that I worked for Neil Adams and I almost worked for Jim Steranko, if you had told me this, like the Ghost of Christmas Future telling me as a 12-year-old in 1970, when I was, drooling over their artwork like everybody else with a drool cup attached to my chin. That's how we were worshiping Adams and Steranko. So to be able to say
that's cool.
those things, I really am blessed.
And what's some of your favorite comics growing up and stuff? I've had to recently cut back on comics. I still get them, but I used to be kind of a former addict after my dad died. So comics kind of became my addiction. So I've had to cut back.
I don't buy the monthly comics. All my money goes to those giant artist edition books.
Yeah.
That reproduce the original art. They just came out with a David Mazzucchelli Batman Year One. That's fabulous, but they're like $150.
Yeah, they're expensive.
But let me tell you something. We are living in a golden age of comic book art. Maybe the kids don't realize it, but I mean, if we had had these artist editions when I was a kid buying those comics, we would have died. I grew up reading the Peanuts and those paperback books. Do you know now they're in these beautiful hardcovers?
Yeah.
Beautifully designed with introductions by Barack Obama and celebrities. I mean, I read those cheap little paperbacks. And it's sort of like the golden age of television we're in. You know, movies aren't where it's at anymore. All the great storytelling is happening on episodic television. It started with The Sopranos. And, we're in a golden age of television. I could name the great movies of the 21st century on one hand. And even then, I don't know if I could fill up one hand.
Yeah, there's a lot of crap that comes out, but there are some gems. We're rewatching Deadwood. That's one I love it, but it pisses me off how it got, canceled and everything. But God, it's so good.
Well, you know what? You got 25 other shows you could watch, and you'll soon forget about Deadwood.
Yeah,
whatever.
There's so many.
But my point is, we are in a golden age of television and a golden age of comic book art in terms of just you go to a comic book store now, the range of things you can buy from the comics themselves, statuettes, posters, T-shirts, I mean, everything. When I was a kid, we had nothing. DC and Marvel barely put out anything.
Yeah, you were lucky if you found one of the cool Mego dolls.
They printed pinups in the comics. You had to buy a second comic to take out the pinup so you wouldn't ruin the first comic.
Yeah.
They didn't make posters. We would have bought them if they made them. Yeah, okay, Marvel was a little better. They had their Marvel Mania and they had the MMM. So they did put out some stuff, but there weren't action figures. Marvel in the late 60s put out these little plastic pieces of shit. DC put out nothing. But yet, on the DC comic book stories and the covers, they would always show, villains holding statuettes of the heroes or whatever. That was like a recurring visual theme. We were reading those comics going, why don't you make those goddamn things so we can buy them? But they didn't. Anyway, I digress.
What was some of why is Walking Distance and Eye of the Beholder so important to you and the episodes?
Okay, so if you know about Eye of the Beholder, to make just for people listening in, spoiler alert, it's about a woman getting plastic surgery for the 11th time, and all during the episode, you never see the doctors or nurses' faces. They're always in shadow. They're shot from behind. Now, because you know the Twilight Zone shtick, as I say, you're already predicting while you're listening to me talk, well, okay, I get it. So, she's going to be beautiful and they're going to be ugly because you don't see the doctor. But imagine it's November 11th, 1960. The Twilight Zone is in its second season. It's always had low ratings because it was a critic's darling, but it was too weird for the American audience. Every other show back then was a Western, and I'm not exaggerating. You look at the TV schedule of 1960, maybe not every other show, every third show, and I'm not exaggerating, was a goddamn Western.
Yeah.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so in the middle of that horrible phalanx of Westerns was the Twilight Zone, which must have been like like a transmission from outer space compared to what was surrounding it. So it always had low ratings, just like Star Trek, by the way. And just like Star Trek was almost canceled, so was the Twilight Zone. Similar thing. What happened to Star Trek? It became Star Trek, right? And look at what happened to Twilight Zone after struggling through 5 seasons. And look at what it became over the 5 seasons and the last 65 years. October 2nd will be the 65th anniversary. Okay, getting back to Eye of the Beholder. So imagine you're not that familiar with the Twilight Zone shtick. And at the end of the episode, of course, yeah, you unroll the bandages. And you know who she is? She's Ellie Mae from the Beverly Hillbillies a year later. Donna Douglas.
Yeah.
She's kind of like a poor man's Marilyn Monroe, right? Blonde, you know, beautiful face. And then, of course, you see the doctors and nurses finally. And there are these horrible pig faces.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what makes the pig faces brilliant and unforgettable, and, you know, we use the word unforgettable like a cliche now. Those pig faces, if you've seen them at whatever age you saw them, why have they burned their way into your brain? Jeffrey, before I tell you my reasoning, why are those pig faces unique in the history of television and cinema, in the history of makeup design, in the history of masks that date back, as you know, with African masks, right?
Yep.
Thousands of years. Why are those masks designed by the great William Tuttle? Why are they the greatest? Why have they burned their way into your brain? And I'm assuming they have. Am I right?
Is it because they're just weird, bizarre? They're so bizarre, it just kind of like sticks with you for sure. It's haunting.
Hey, what's your answer?
Well, actually, I know the episode you're talking about very well. I also went to art school. I went to SCAD but I went for video.
Very nice.
Television production, but it's also an art school. Anyway, I watched that episode. I don't know how many times, but why those images are burned in my head is throughout the episode. It's through the patient's point of view. You don't see the beautiful blonde girl till the very end.
Well, that's what I said.
But that tension they build up. You're thinking, you know, because they keep harassing her on her beauty, how she's
horrible.
Yeah,
and she's so horrible. There are people that look like her that they keep in a ghetto.
Yeah,
got to be quarantined,
and so you're thinking in your head, well, how terrible must she look for these people to be? And then when they take off their masks and look even worse, yeah, that's
imagining how ugly could this woman be?
Right, exactly. And then the doctors and the nurses take their masks off, and you're like, you know.
Okay, but it didn't answer my question.
Oh, because
why are the masks specifically the pig faces? Why have they burned their way into your brain forever?
Well, when I was a kid, they looked so realistic, but you know, as an adult, having seen them several times, that you know, you can just tell that they're not. It's not. There's some good special effects makeup, and there's not some. Those are pretty good, though. They burned an impression in your face.
Why?
I don't have an answer other than the fact that you're expecting her to be like that, and then they're like that. So I don't know.
There are masks and there are masks. There are good masks and bad masks. There are memorable masks and unmemorable ones. I'm asking you specifically, think about those masks, those pig faces. And why have they been burned into your brain unlike other masks?
Bacon.
Well, it's got to be shock factor. I mean, because you're expecting them to look regular, and then they take off their masks and they're horrible looking.
But think about it. Here's why I'm going on this. Jay, they remade this episode on one of the crappy Twilight Zone remakes in the 80s.
Oh, crap.
And they got a famous supermodel of the time, Molly Haskell or something. She was a top supermodel to play the woman under the bandages so that when she's revealed, she's beautiful. And then you see what they chose as the remake of Eye of the Beholder. I was curious to see how would they reinterpret the original pig faces.
Yeah.
And you know what they look like in the remake? like burn victims. You know, the way the flesh is like melted looking or something.
Zombie-ish, yeah.
Whatever the fuck it was, part of my brain. My point is, this is what I mean about memorable masks and unmemorable. Why are the Twilight Zone pig faces so goddamn unique, so memorable that you talk to people about this episode and they always say those pig faces freak me out. There's something about those pig faces. I've got my own theory. I was just interested to see whether you guys, upon pondering the question, might have an answer. But I see I've stumped you both.
Yeah.
By the way, I don't have a solid answer.
You both failed my remedial Twilight Zone class.
But here's
my theory, boys. Just pay attention and listen and learn. Here's my own theory. What makes those masks so brilliant is that they're both ridiculous and even funny looking when you first see them. But then at the same time,
here's what they look like.
Hey, let me finish. At the same time, they are also horrible looking. Riding that line between comedy and horror, between good and evil, any way you want to make it a dichotomy, but riding that line is very creatively difficult.
Yeah.
Modern special effects are all these drippy, gooey, alien. You know what I'm talking about. And a cheap version was that remake of Eye of the Beholder. The drippy, burnt victim look.
Yeah.
You look at those William Tuttle masks, and like I said, your first instinct, how they say people, when they're scared, they laugh? It's a nervous reaction. When you look at those pig faces, your first instinct is either comedy or horror. They either look horrible or they kind of look funny, but then they look horrible. And while they're horrible, they're also kind of funny. What other thing in pop culture history can you say that about?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Mark Eddy said they were freaky when I asked him, so I don't think he knew either. So
you can describe them as creepy, freaky, whatever. But my theory that they ride the line that is the most difficult line to ride creatively between comedy and horror. You know the famous tragedy mask, tragedy and comedy?
yes.
Those pig faces are like if you took both masks and superimposed them onto one another. That's the pig faces.
Yep.
Here is a good photo of Ellie Mae and the two pig-faced doctor and nurse.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I also saw that Rod.
Look at the pig face, the snouts, the porcine snouts. They look funny.
Yeah.
The upper lip, like the worst Elvis impression of the upper lip, the curled upper lip. So it's kind of funny looking, but it's also grotesque. There's something horrible about them, but they're also funny. It's like Sam Kinison. It's like, it's like screaming at you, but it's funny. I mean, again, riding that line between comedy and horror is very difficult.
I've always loved the anthology shows, and I guess Twilight Zone's probably the king of them. But was there anything before that that was like one step beyond? I never watched, but I love Tales from the Dark Side, Creep Show, and Tales from the Crypt, all that. The anthologies, I love those.
But here's the difference. Alfred Hitchcock Presents, they were mostly crime stories.
Mm-hmm.
There really wasn't anything supernatural. The Twilight Zone is all about a supernatural element. Now, yes, there were shows before. This is like talking about the history of rock and roll. Was That's All Right, My Mama, the first rock and roll song, but what about Rocket 88 by whatever? My point is, nothing is truly original. What we laymen think of as original is really the creation of a new reality made up of things that have already previously existed. Okay? But they have never been properly introduced. I call it the Reese's peanut butter cup theory of original creation. Reese's peanut butter cups. They're peanut butter and chocolate that each existed until Reese introduced them to each other and created a new reality. The most popular, I think, candy in the world is Reese's peanut butter cups.
And we know Rod Serling, I saw, did a Western, The Loner, with Lloyd Bridges. I've never seen that. I have it to watch one year. But of course, what do you think inspired him to go into this, like, this place? This kind of, like, I wouldn't even say Lovecraftian. It's his own in his own right. But what made him go there?
So Rod Serling counts as one of the great American writers who emerged from the scars of World War II. J.D. Salinger, Norman Mailer, Bud Schulberg. I could go on. But there was a group of male writers that they're only learning now, like with J.D. Salinger, what we now call PTSD. Back then it was called shell shock. But it was only recently revealed, maybe about 10 years ago, that J.D. Salinger suffered PTSD, which influenced writing Catcher on the Rye. So Serling was one of them. He came out of his experiences in World War II. You know, there's a graphic novel, been out for about 5 years, called Twilight Man by Corin Shadme. And it's really great. It centers on his war experiences. He saw one of his buddies get decapitated by a supply crate dropped by their own forces. And it was stuff like that that gave Serling nightmares after the war. Classic PTSD. But like those other great writers, he channeled the tragedies into his writing. And that's how the Twilight Zone became this depository of all of his feelings about life and death, morality, all the things that the innocence was taken away from him, like a whole generation of young American men. That generation, the greatest generation, they didn't talk about their experiences in the war. They were so horrible, but there wasn't the mechanisms. There wasn't the therapy back then. So they kept, that whole generation kept it in. But some of those men got it out through their art, through their writing. So in my book, I make it a point to point out those essays, in my essays, those episodes, more than some others, deal directly with his war experiences. And Serling was able to channel, talk about taking a negative into a positive. But like I said, that's what Mailer and Salinger and everybody else, that's what they did.
How was Serling involved with Planet of the Apes? I didn't even know that one. I never heard that.
So if you look at the fine print on the Planet of the Apes poster from 1968, you'll see screenplay by Michael Wilson and Rod Serling. Now, there's a whole book about the making of Planet of the Apes. It was a convoluted, one of these, movies that had a whole, up and down genesis. We could spend the whole podcast talking about the making of Planet of the Apes. But suffice it to say, Serling was an early screenwriter. He wrote a couple drafts. Then Michael Wilson, whoever he is, got a hold of it. He wrote it, blah, 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 blah. A million details. Who the hell knows? But the ending of the Planet of the Apes, that is along with, Citizen Kane and Rosebud, there really wasn't a great movie ending like Citizen Kane until you got the ending of Planet of the Apes with that Statue of Liberty. Because here's the thing. Why do I credit that to Serling, that great ending? Because there is a Twilight Zone episode from 1960. The first season the show was on the air. And it's about a couple of American spacemen who think they've crash landed on a desert planet. And like 10 little Indians, they kill each other off until only one is left. But when the last guy that he killed was done with his dying breath, he scratched what looks like the letter X or a lowercase t in the sand. And that's it. And then he dies. So we don't know what he was trying to say with that image. Anyway, one guy's left, the murderer of all the others. He goes over a ridge, and what does he see? Signs to Reno, Nevada. They had crash landed back on Earth and didn't realize it. Now get this. Serling got the idea from a woman at a cocktail party in 1959 after the Twilight Zone debuted and made Serling a star. He's at a cocktail party in Los Angeles. The space program, what was it first called? The Gemini program, if you saw the right stuff, was started in 1958. So it was brand new, the space program. And a woman at the cocktail party named Madeline Champion, I don't really know anything about her. I don't think she was a writer, but whatever. She happened to opine, I bet you if astronauts crash landed in the Mojave Desert, they would think they were on another planet. Well, Serling loved what she said, took out $500 from his wallet, and paid her right away. So when you see the TV episode, it's credited story by Madeline Champion or from an idea. The point is, Serling borrowed that idea because here's the thing. Planet of the Apes, if you know anything about the provenance of the film, it's based on a novel by a French author named Pierre Boulet. And the original novel is what Tim Burton based his remake about, 25 years ago or so? He made his version, which was based on the Boulet book, which takes place not on Earth, but on another planet entirely that is run by apes, and the humans are the slaves. Well, Serling is the one that I believe, based on that Twilight Zone episode, is the one that turned it into that great ending where you don't realize it until you get to the end. You think you're on another planet, just like Charlton Heston thought he was on another planet. And then you come to the Statue of Liberty, just like the signs to Reno, Nevada in the Twilight Zone episode.
Yep.
And that's it. So, according to my friend, an editor I know in Los Angeles, in the book about the making of Planet of the Apes, it doesn't give Serling the credit. Well, books have been wrong. Databases have been wrong. If we're in a court right now, I'm presenting as Exhibit A that Rod Serling came up with the ending to Planet of the Apes with that Twilight Zone episode. And if you've got evidence that Michael Wilson came up with it instead, be my guest. Did that answer your question, Jeffrey?
Yes, it did indeed. And I love this. I love the Twilight Zone, and I love your passion for all of this. And what about the statue coming up? Is there some kind of statue of Serling that's coming up?
His adopted hometown. He was actually born in Syracuse, but he grew up in Binghamton. So yeah, there's a Rod Serling Memorial Foundation, and they raised money and came up with a statue to honor him. So, listen, it's like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame being in Cleveland. No offense to Cleveland, but just because Alan Freed, the DJ, coined the name rock and roll because he was a DJ in Cleveland, there's no reason to put the Rock and Roll Museum there. And between you and me, okay, who's going to go to Binghamton? I mean, you got to schlep to get to Binghamton. You know what I mean? So I wish him the best. There's a statue of Rod Serling in Binghamton. The expression, I spent a month there last weekend. No offense to Binghamton, but, okay, so there's a Rod Serling statue in Binghamton.
That's cool. Well, tell us about your
statue in Hollywood on whatever the main drag is, because he is the father of American popular culture that comes out of Hollywood. Steven Spielberg, Stephen King, David Lynch, J.J. Abrams, the guy that did X-Files, what's his name?
Chris Carter, yeah.
Yep, Chris
Carter. The guy that, Vince Gilligan. Do you know when Breaking Bad ended and people were calling it one of the greatest TV shows of all time? They asked TV Guide, asked Vince Gilligan, well, Vince, now that you've wrapped up Breaking Bad and critics are calling it one of the greatest shows, how would you like your show to be remembered, 50 years from now? And you know how he answered? He said, if my show can be discussed the way we talk about Rod Serling and the Twilight Zone, then I'll be a happy boy. Words about that.
And I saw he's supposed to do an X-Files type kind of situation next, some kind of paranormal, blah, 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 something.
Well, my point is, the real statue of Serling should be in Hollywood is where they made the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
In doing the Twilight Zone,
Culver City's where the studio was. Yeah.
Everybody from George Lucas, James Cameron, the creators of our modern popular culture, all bow down to Rod Serling and the Twilight Zone. Stephen King wrote about it. He put out a book in '83 called Dance Macabre, which was a nonfiction overview of the science fiction, fantasy, and horror fields. And he said in the book, not only is Twilight Zone immortal, but Serling showed us a new way that kindled our imaginations of mine and my whole generation. And who do you think's in his generation? Everybody else. Stephen King, Steven Spielberg, David Lynch, the list goes on and on. And what is that list? The creators of our modern fantasy and popular culture. Do you realize there would be no Spider-Man if it wasn't for the Twilight Zone? Now, why would I say that?
I'm not sure, but
to my two podcast hosts, why, without the Twilight Zone, would there be no Spider-Man? Doesn't that sound outrageous to claim that?
Yeah, you'll have to explain that one. I know for a good fact that there are several characters or actors on the Twilight Zone that were shared. That somehow they went over to Desilu Studios, which was on Paramount's back lot,
but
where they were making Star Trek.
We're getting off the track. Why am I connecting Spider-Man with the Twilight Zone?
I have no idea. I can connect it to Star Trek and a few other TV shows. That's it.
You have any?
I'm not sure. Radiation.
You like the way I'm baffling the two of you? So far, 0-2. Okay, are you ready for this one? Okay.
Go ahead. I want to hear it.
We all know Spider-Man's first appearance was in a title called
Amazing Fantasy.
No, it wasn't Spider-Man #1.
Yeah, it was Amazing Fantasy. I don't remember the number.
Yes.
Yeah.
J. McNicholas.
Yeah.
Do you remember what number it was?
I don't. Maybe 17, but I'm not really certain.
You're close. 15.
Okay. Yeah.
Before Amazing Fantasy 15, it was called Amazing Adult Fantasy. The first issue comes out a month after Fantastic Four #1.
Oh, wow.
The stories, I believe, are Steve Ditko's stories that Stan Lee, just like with Jack Kirby, came after the fact and just put in the dialogue and captions. But I believe the visual storytelling that was done first, I believe they were 5-page short stories called Amazing Adult Fantasy, all illustrated by Steve Ditko. And they're all fantasy stories, some science fiction, some horror, and they have surprise endings. So 1961 was when the Twilight Zone was entering its 3rd season. Many of the stories are knockoffs of Twilight Zone episodes. You know the one with Burgess Meredith, Last Man on Earth, breaks his glasses?
Yes, I know that one.
There's a Steve Ditko Amazing Adult Fantasy story called Last Man on Earth. You know the one Twilight Zone After Hours where the mannequins come to life?
Yes.
One of my favorite episodes?
Yes.
Okay. There's a Steve Ditko story called The Mannequins.
There's
a
really bad 80s movie with Andrew McCarthy about where a mannequin comes
to life. Again, that's the influence of the Twilight Zone.
Right, exactly.
My point is, they were all knockoffs of Twilight Zone stories or done in the style of Twilight Zone. And here's the thing. In the last issue, sales weren't good. So they decided to just take out the word adult and just call it Amazing Fantasy. And in the last issue, they decided to run a Ditko version of the Spider-Man concept that Kirby and his partner Joe Simon had created years earlier, but that had nothing to do with Ditko Spider-Man. But the Spider-Man story is a Twilight Zone superhero story. Why? Because it's built on irony. When Spider-Man had the chance to stop the criminal,
Right.
but he was too selfish. Remember, he's counting his money.
Right. Yep.
Okay. And then what happens? The criminal that he let loose ends up killing his Uncle Ben and causing Spider-Man, out of guilt, out of irony, to become the superhero he became. That was an amazing adult fantasy.
Yeah.
Twilight Zone, because every other DC comic superhero, even the Fantastic Four, before Spider-Man, got their powers from cosmic rays. You know, the Flash was hit by lightning with the chemicals. Either they were Superman was an alien, but and the minute they got their powers, the first thing was not, I'm going to go make money. No, I'm going to fight crime. Spider-Man was the first guy that said, wait a second, I got these powers. I'm going to make money with them.
Yeah.
I'm going to go on reality television. The version of the Ed Sullivan Show that Ditko puts in the first story.
Yeah, I always say that Spider-Man is the best superhero because he had to train himself. All of a sudden, he's normal. Next day, he has superpowers.
He had to what himself?
He had to train himself how to not only use the powers, but how to be responsible with it. He's irresponsible right away with it. So
the main point I want to focus on, my claim that the Twilight Zone, Spider-Man would not have happened without the Twilight Zone's influence, because as I've just shown you or talked about, the story of Spider-Man is an ironic Twilight Zone version of a superhero origin story, because before Spider-Man, no superhero got their powers because of irony. You know what I mean? And that makes Spider-Man influence like the rest of American pop culture. Twilight Zone and Rod Serling, I maintain in my book, I call it the father of American popular culture. So this goes back to your statue. I don't care about Binghamton. I'm never going to go to Binghamton. No offense, Binghamton, but might be in LA. LA was where Twilight Zone was created, written, and made. There should be a statue as big as the Capitol Theater building of Rod Serling in the middle of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
If there was justice, if life were fair. Anywho.
And then your book has a foreword by Anne Serling. That's pretty cool. Definitely. I was just saying your book has a foreword by Anne Serling.
Say that again?
Your book has a foreword by Anne Serling.
Yes, so Anne Serling, Rod's daughter, he's had two daughters that are now, I guess right around 70 years old. And I got to know better because she lived on the East Coast near Binghamton, whereas I forget the name of the other sister. Wow, I forget. She's in Los Angeles. So, and when I did a multimedia lecture on the Twilight Zone that I've done over the years, where I show it's the middle ground between surrealism that preceded the show and modern art and popular culture that came after the Twilight Zone. So I do a whole slideshow where I read dialogue. And it's like spoken word performance. Anyway, in 2008, they had a symposium at Ithaca where Serling has all his papers. It's near Binghamton. And I went up and did my multimedia lecture there. And I had never met Anne Serling. I knew of her. But when I was done with my presentation, which is a total Serling is God love fest, she came down from the aisle with tears in her eyes, thanking me for the tribute that I just gave to her father. And remember, I told you I didn't have a father. My father is a face in a photograph. But what I've done for the Twilight Zone, my multimedia works, my 2 books, my other little projects here and there, and they're all posted either on my website or my Vimeo channel. I've done what I imagine a son who would want to honor his father would do. I've honored Rod Serling, my metaphorical father, because I'm at the age I could have been the son of Rod Serling, but the work I've done is me as the son of Rod Serling, conceptually honoring my conceptual father's work.
Well, we get about 800,000 listeners a show here lately. Tell us about your symposium. I want to definitely help get the word out.
I live in Westport, Connecticut. I used to live in New York City. I grew up in New Jersey, but I wound up in Westport, Connecticut, which is a whole podcast unto itself.
I've been to Westport and Binghamton, but Westport's gorgeous.
Well, one of my friends, when I told him I moved to Westport, he looked in the sky and goes, "God's country." Well, for me personally, it's kind of been the opposite, but that's a whole nother story. And I don't want to bore you with the tales of woe of Arlen Schumer's life. Suffice it to say, I end up moving to Westport, Connecticut. Now, Rod Serling, I knew, had lived here in the 50s when he was commuting into New York City to do those 90-minute live television shows during what was called the golden age of television, when everything was out of New York, not Los Angeles, and it was all live. And that's what Serling was doing while living in Westport. He won his 3 Emmys while in Westport in the mid-50s. First for a show called Patterns, then a show called Requiem for a Heavyweight, both of which were made into films, and an adaptation. Serling was a master adapter, which, as you know, is an art unto itself. Some of the greatest Twilight Zone episodes are not Serling originals. They're Serling adaptations.
Yep.
And that's what he was also a master of and doesn't get the credit. You know, when people talk about Time Enough at Last with Burgess Meredith, they're all like, "Oh, I can't believe I loved Henry Bemis, and then it's so sad when his glasses break." Well, guess what, folks? That wasn't a Serling original. It was an adaptation. In my opinion, that's not Serling's worldview. You violate the rules of storytelling when you make us, the audience, fall in love or be sympathetic to a character, and then at the very end, do what he did to Henry Bemis by breaking his glasses. The reason why people remember that episode is because it's a cruel ending, and it's a manipulation by the author on the part of the audience to make you think, you love this character, don't you? I've made him a sympathetic character the whole episode. Guess what? Now I'm going to fuck him over just so you'll remember this. And guess what? We remember it. But in my opinion, if that were a Serling original, it would have ended with a crane shot pulling away from Henry Bemis, finally getting time enough at last to read his goddamn books. But maybe that might not have been as remembered, but people remember the cruelty. And that is the only reason why well, not the only reason, but it's the main reason why that episode is so fondly remembered, for the wrong reasons. But it was a master adaptation, Serling being faithful to the original ending.
And what days are the symposium? Is it online or at a particular event?
I get distracted. I need a script to keep track of. Now, where was I? Okay.
Symposium.
Serling lived in Westport in the 50s. And then he went after the 3 Emmys, he had the creative clout to go out to LA to do the Twilight Zone. Now, what we nowadays call a showrunner, Serling was the first creative artist in charge of a television show. Not somebody from the account side, not somebody from the business side, not an ad agency, which basically owned television back then. The advertisers had content control over the content of television in the 50s. Serling was the first creative person to be handed a broadcast television show. And why is the Twilight Zone so great? Because Serling was so respected as a writer, and that actors in Hollywood, other writers, were like, they couldn't believe a creative artist was in charge of a television show. Everybody wanted to work for Serling. And Serling allowed, just like Orson Welles with his Mercury Theater, he allowed his creative professionals to do their job. He didn't interfere. He changed nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Creative people love working for a creative boss who lets them do what they were hired to do, which was to be creative. But that's one of the reasons why Twilight Zone has lasted and is still timeless. When you watch those episodes, especially on the new Blu-ray DVDs, they look like they were filmed yesterday in the East Village at some experimental theater.
What was the Dr. No?
Symposium.
Oh, Symposium. That's right.
Symposium. I tell you, script girl. Okay. So knowing that, Westport is blessed with a state-of-the-art modern library that you have to see it to believe it.
Yeah.
Maybe you go to westportlibrary.com. There's pictures of the interior. But I'm telling you, Westport is a wealthy, white, suburban town, 45 minutes out of New York City. It's got money, and we got a beautiful library. So when I knew my book was coming out in the fall, October 2nd, the exact 65th anniversary, I pitched to the Westport Library, since my book is called The 5 Themes of the Twilight Zone, and I think big as a pop culture historian, I pitched them a 5-day symposium because there are movies that were influenced by Twilight Zone episodes that could be part of the festivities. I would do a whole, lecture about Serling and Twilight Zone. See, my feeling is some of the best episodes, which were about the dark underbelly of suburbia, like Jeffrey, you mentioned Monsters That Do on Maple Street at the top of the podcast, remember?
Yes.
I believe, and again, I wish Serling was still alive, I could ask him these questions. I believe some of those episodes, there's about one handful, that might have been directly influenced by his time spent in a, outside New York City, modern, suburban, mid-50s American, whatever it was. Whether there was the kind of McCarthyism going on in Westport in the 50s, I don't know. But whatever the climate was in the 50s, Serling experienced it in Westport at a crucial time. So I do a whole lecture. It's on my Vimeo channel. I did it as a webinar a few years ago called Westport in the Twilight Zone. And I kind of show all this. And, there's one episode that everybody loves. It was Serling's favorite, called A Stop at Willoughby. You know that episode? Willoughby, next stop, Willoughby.
Yes.
That one?
I don't think I know that one. I might if I saw it.
Well, it was Serling's favorite. And it's one of his doppelganger episodes where the lead actor is basically Serling, an ad exec in New York City that can't take the rat race. He actually is living in Westport. You can hear the conductor on the train going, Westport, Saugatuck, Stamford. These are all the stops on the New Haven line coming out of Grand Central Station in Manhattan. Anyway, he's married to a materialist shrew of a wife who only is with him for his big ad agency salary. But here's what happens during the episode. While he's on the train, he drifts off to sleep and he wakes up as if in a dream. All of a sudden, he's in an 1890s rail car. It's the summer instead of the winter. And outside the window is a little town called Willoughby. There's a gazebo and a guy in a unicycle right out of a Currier and Ives 1890s, thing. And he goes to get off, but he doesn't make it in time. And he wakes up and he's back in the winter in the modern train car going from Westport to New York. Anyway, by the end of the episode, he quits his job. He can't take it. His wife leaves him. And he decides, this time when I dream about Willoughby, I'm going to get off. And sure enough, he gets on the train, goes to sleep, wakes up in Willoughby, and this time he gets off. And he walks off into the sunset with 2 Huckleberry Finn types with their fishing rods to go fishing. All of a sudden, you cut. You see the guy dead on the ground in the snow. And the camera pulls back. and you see the conductor and a policeman. What happened? The policeman says, and the conductor goes, he fell from a trestle, the train up above, down to the ground below in the snow. He goes, the guy got up, yelled something about Willoughby, and jumped off the train.
Oh, God.
Okay, and then, of course, to gild the lily, as they say, the hearse comes along, and they put the guy's dead body, and you see the back of the hearse, the logo.
It says Willoughby.
Willoughby and Sons Funeral Home.
Yeah.
Gilding the lily means.
Now I remember it.
It didn't need that. Rod, you were a little heavy-handed sometimes. I don't think you needed that, but okay, whatever. The point is, I believe Serling in the mid-50s, when he was commuting back and forth, saw in the faces of the men, mostly men in those days, no women, the pressure, the tensions. All during the Willoughby episode, by the way, he hints that the guy has an ulcer from the tension and the pressure. I bet you it's something Serling witnessed in many of the men that he was commuting back and forth with. And Willoughby is not only one of the most memorable episodes of The Twilight Zone, but it was Serling's favorite episode because he was so nostalgic for the Binghamton of his youth before he lost his innocence in World War II, that in his very last interview before he died in 75 at the age of 50 from all those cigarettes he smoked. Don't smoke tobacco, kids. He wasn't even 50, and he died. When they opened him up on the operating table, they said he had the veins of an 80-year-old man.
Wow.
Anyway, in his last interview, he wishes he could go back to the late 19th century, gazebos, everything that Willoughby was. That was Serling's. So that's why it was his favorite episode. So here's the thing. Remember I said it's the 65th anniversary of The Twilight Zone?
Yeah.
Well, it's also the 60th anniversary of the John Cheever short story called The Swimmer. Now, have either of you ever seen the Burt Lancaster movie called The Swimmer, made and released in 1968? It's
I
a
haven't.
cult film.
I don't think so. I would have been 2, so I don't think I've
I'll
seen
check it out though.
I'm talking about, did you see it back then?
it.
I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it.
No, I don't think I have.
Have you heard of it?
Through you, that's it. When I read through your
I
stuff.
believe I've seen like the posters for it, pictures of him in the bathing suit
Okay,
for
did you
it.
read the PDF I sent you of the article I wrote?
Yes.
The Twilight Zone Willoughby episode, the Cheever short story, which is considered his greatest short story, and the movie The Swimmer, which has been reconsidered in the 21st century as a great film. But like all cult films, they bombed in their original release, right? And then they get a second life somehow. And that's what happened with The Swimmer. When I saw it as a teenager in the 70s on television late one night, I remember going, wow, that's like a Twilight Zone episode. So if you read my article, I talked about picking up the Grindhouse Blu-ray DVD that they put out 10 years ago. I don't know why I didn't hear about that. I would have bought it. But on the back of cover of the slipcase, it describes The Swimmer as a feature-length Twilight Zone episode by way of the New Yorker, which is where Cheever's story was first published, the famous magazine, The New Yorker. So the very first night of the symposium, I'm going to talk about Westport and the Twilight Zone, and then segue to showing the episode Willoughby. And then after Willoughby's over, segue to showing The Swimmer, which if you've never seen it, it's going to blow your minds, guys. Read up on it if you want to. There's YouTube reviewers now talking about it. There's like a dozen YouTube videos talking about The Swimmer. But the best thing would be to not know anything about it or just read the Cheever short story. That's all you should read. And it's online. You can find it. And then go see the movie somehow. Rent it, buy it, whatever you got to do. And then come back and we should do a podcast talking about Willoughby, Cheever, and The Swimmer. But That'll be the opening night of the symposium. And then each night, by the way, they went for my idea. They could only do 4 nights because they already had something booked. But I said, if I had just gotten 1 hour to do my lecture about my book and then had a book signing, I would have been happy. But the fact that they went with my idea, I was a little bit surprised. But hey, it's going to happen September 26th to the 29th. It's on the Westport Library website. And the bottom line is each of the nights I'm going to be screening episodes with movies that were inspired by Twilight Zone. So the third night, I'm going to be talking with a Twilight Zone author that's an expert in the 19th century, Mark Twain, the Civil War. Well, there was a Twilight Zone episode called Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. Jeffrey, have you heard of that? Jay, do you know that?
I've heard of it, and I'm going to watch The Swimmer very soon. I've made arrangements.
Have either of you seen the Twilight Zone episode that was actually a short French film called Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge?
I've seen it. It's been a while, but I have seen them all. So,
have you seen that specific episode?
Yes,
I probably have, but I can't recall it just by its title. For Star Trek, I could.
Your prior answers, guys, your credibility is shot with me. I don't think either of you have seen it. Jeff, can you prove you've seen Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge?
Yes, I can. I have the entire box set, and I've watched the entire box set. I've seen it.
What happens at the end?
I would have to watch it again to remember.
Guess what? The judges will not accept that answer. Okay, and Jay, trust me, I haven't seen it. Guys, don't you love the fact that I'm turning you on to all this new material?
Definitely. I'm watching The Swimmer very soon. I've made arrangements.
It's a guess that for free, I'm just handing you this great shit. Okay, Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. Have you guys ever seen the great horror movie called Jacob's Ladder from 1990?
Yes.
With what's his name?
Tim Robbins.
Tim Robbins. Have you seen Jacob's Ladder, Jay McNicholas?
I do believe I saw it in the theater, but I do not remember it.
Oh,
I'm not a big horror fan.
Jay, I just want to say,
it's a weird one.
Telling us you've seen something but can't remember it would not hold up in court. The question is, have you seen the Exhibit A? Saying I saw it but I don't remember it, that's telling me then you really haven't seen it. Because, I mean, if something is good, I remember something from it.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of horror. So,
I thought you were.
No,
Jeff, I thought this was like a horror something.
I'm more of a sci-fi guy.
Well,
I'm horror.
Sci-fi, horror.
I love it all.
And they all. Okay, so Jay, now you got another great movie to see, Jacob's Ladder.
It's haunting. It's really a good one. It's very crazy.
When you see Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge first, if you remember Jacob's Ladder, it's essentially the same story, but transposed in the future to the Vietnam War instead of the Civil War. Do you remember how Jacob's Ladder ends?
There's definitely a crazy ass ending, and
boy, you guys are failing.
I know.
Every question I'm asking.
A lot of movies I saw on drugs a long time ago.
You gotta have me on this podcast more often because I could shine you on to so much pop culture.
I like your passion.
I'm just saying this is shit that you should know about.
Yeah. Well, the real reason we do this show is I lost a nut at 17 to cancer, and then my dad died, and I attract paranormal events and UFOs. Like, we have real people on about that crazy stuff. So that's what we do a lot of times.
Wow.
I love this. I love it.
I don't know if I can, relate to any of that, but more power to you. Bottom line is Occurrence and Jacob's Ladder is Saturday night. And then Sunday, do you know the Twilight Zone episode number 12 looks just like you?
No.
That one, I've seen it, but probably don't know it as good as you do.
Oh, Jay, stop telling me you've seen it and don't remember anything.
I've seen a lot of stuff I don't remember.
I tell you 8 Ways to Sunday, I'm not buying. I saw it, but I don't remember anything.
Your memory is probably better than ours.
Jay, you're losing credibility with me, man.
Hey, I have watched a lot of television and I've forgotten
No,
as much
but
as I
don't
remember.
tell me. No, I don't buy that. I think you remember what you saw. I don't buy that you saw shit and don't remember it unless it's a piece of shit. Yeah, you don't remember shit. I get that. But we're talking about the good shit. And the good shit, if you saw it, you would remember it. You would remember number 12 looks just like you if you saw it. Okay?
Like I said, I don't know those shows by title. If it were Star Trek, I know those shows by title. Twilight Zone, you tell me what happens in the episode. I'll tell you if I saw it or not.
What? Jeffrey, you need to lend Jay your Twilight Zone Blu-ray DVD because this guy needs to brush up on his Twilight.
I want to watch them again. I really do. This has made me want to watch
Both
them
of you
again.
need to brush up. Don't call yourself a Twilight Zone fan and then not know any episode I bring up. Listen, this is all for your own good, you know. What am I getting at? Nothing. This is all for you guys. Listen, you're a little younger than me. You're like the sons I always wanted and never had. And I'm just here to shine you on to great shit that you just don't know.
We've had Mark Dizelak on about Edgar Allan Poe, but not about his Twilight Zone book. I saw he left you a blurb.
He's an expert in Mark Twain. I love the fact I'm just finishing reading his book because I got to interview him. It's going to be live streamed from Ohio on stage in Westport, Connecticut, Saturday night. And he'll be able to talk about Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge based on a short story by the great American writer who fought in the Civil War, Ambrose Bierce. So it'll be a great evening because Mark is an expert in all that shit that I know nothing about. But he compares Mark Twain to Serling. He compares Serling to Charles Dickens, which is also perfect. You know, A Christmas Carol could almost be looked on as the first kind of Twilight Zone story, if you think about it.
Yeah.
He's visited by ghosts from the future, right? And hello. That's an
Twilight Zone. You could say that. That is for sure. Nobody thinks about that.
And then you jump, in my opinion, to It's a Wonderful Life, 1946.
Yeah.
The sequence of the last act of the film where he experiences his life as if he had never been born. In my opinion, Serling, whenever he saw that, and remember, that's all about coming right back after the war. People didn't realize that Jimmy Stewart also had PTSD. And that desperation when he's on the brink of suicide, why are those scenes so real? He was tapping into his post-World War II experiences. So I believe whenever Serling saw It's a Wonderful Life, I think that, and that sequence is about the length of a Twilight Zone episode, about 25 minutes. And I believe while A Christmas Carol is the literary antecedent of the Twilight Zone, I believe that the fantasy sequence in It's a Wonderful Life is the true proto Twilight Zone episode. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know I know Richard Matheson and Robert Bloch do some stuff too. Richard Matheson, I know.
He wrote the second. Serling wrote like 92 out of the 156 episodes. He wrote what I consider the best episodes, and he also wrote the worst episodes. He was very uneven, but again, when you're churning out anthology television on a weekly basis, keeping the quality up is very difficult. You know, modern television is recurring characters. You have the same sets, the same characters. You just come up with new situations for the comedy. Serling every week, anthology, new sets, new characters, new everything.
And who's the actor that played Dr. No from James Bond that was on Twilight Zone?
Yeah, that was what's the
big connection.
Why am I drawing a blank on his name? Nice Jewish boy, Dr. No. Boy, I'm blanking on his name, and I do a lecture on Dr. No. I'm blanking on the Joseph Wiseman.
Okay.
Why do you bring him up?
James Bond connection, the villain, and then on the Twilight Zone. Yes.
Yeah. So again, Serling doesn't get the credit, but what if I told you Serling invented the cinematic Bond villain, and he doesn't get the credit? So how can I get away with saying that, Jeff?
I don't know, but I'm sure you can. There's an episode that taps into it.
The episode you just brought up. Why did you bring up the Joseph White? You know that episode?
I know it. Yes, I do.
Okay, so it's called boy, why am I blanking on the title of this episode? It's about a wealthy guy that's super smart and builds an underground bunker with state-of-the-art multimedia. And he's rich. And he invites 3 people from his life, his school teacher, an army guy, and a priest or something. And they all have wronged him when he was younger. And he's holding a grudge. And basically, using his multimedia that he paid a fortune for, he simulates a nuclear attack up above to make the 3 people realize that the world is gone. And he says to them, the whole world is radioactive. You can't go up. But if you want to stay with me in my ultra modern underground, state-of-the-art, bomb shelter, only if you say you're sorry.
One more pallbearer.
Thank you. I'll let you live with me. Well, each one of them, to their credit, they've got integrity. They basically said, F you. I'd rather die from radioactive poisoning than spend another minute with you. So what happens at the end, he basically goes nuts, and he thinks the multimedia recreation is really happening. And then when he goes up above, he thinks the world is destroyed. And then, of course, you dissolve. He's just a crazy nut on a New York City street babbling about, I destroyed the world or whatever. Anyway, why is that the Bond villain? Well, when you see the guy in his underground lair wearing an ascot, and he's super brilliant, and he's super rich, and he's megalomaniacal. Megalomaniacal. Thank you, Jake. Basically, when they were looking, okay, so this is airing in 1961, when they're just starting to write and create Dr. No in England.
Yeah.
It was filmed in 62 and released in 63, or fall of 62. My point is, I bet you when they were looking for a Dr. No villain, everybody watched The Twilight Zone in those days, the creative people. I bet you they saw that episode and said, there's our Dr. No. All we got to do is put makeup, which is what they did to English actors in those days, to make them look Oriental, as they were called. They put makeup on and slit their eyes. And that's Joseph Wiseman and Dr. No. But basically, when you see the way Dr. No talks, and he's rich, and he's in an underground bunker.
Yeah.
It's basically Serling's Paul Radin character.
Not just an underground bunker, but a sophisticated, ultra-modernistic underground bunker.
It had state-of-the-art, multimedia.
Right, yeah. It had everything in it. Rise Up televisions, I mean, stuff we have today.
He's super smart, but he's evil.
Yeah.
He could have had anything. He's super rich, but he put it towards this bullshit. The point is, it's basically the template for every Bond villain since, and Serling doesn't get the credit. They not only took the actor, they took the persona that Serling created. Yes, it was in the books, but somebody had to bring it to life dramatically.
Yeah.
Rod Serling. Sorry. And
So
again,
what else?
Exhibit A is one more pallbearer.
Okay, we got the Westport and Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone, a 4-day symposium featuring live presentations, book signings, special TV and film screenings, and exhibitions celebrating the series' 65th anniversary and Rod Serling's centennial, September 26th through the 29th, Westport, Connecticut. So check it out, everybody.
Library.com or whatever. And
What
go to their schedule, you'll see you can buy tickets, and then it's linked to my book site, even though my book comes out October 2nd, I think you could pre-order it or whatever. Get the hardcover because I'm only in this, folks, for the hardcover. A soft cover might be cheaper. A soft cover is what I call a necessary evil that you have to put out just for people. It's all about the hardcover. And yeah, so like the last night, I just want to say, number 12 looks just like you. It's all about the future where women and men can trade in their ugly bodies for beautiful bodies. Well, remember the movie The Stepford Wives? 1975 with the great Catherine Ross.
Yeah.
Well, that's a cult movie too. And here's the thing. The novel written by Ira Levin, Stepford Wives, was 1972, 8 years after that episode aired. By the way, The Swimmer was partially filmed in Westport. Stepford Wives was partially filmed in Westport. So you see Westport in the Twilight Zone?
Yeah.
I'm showing the number 12 Looks Just Like You episode with the original 1964 commercials.
Oh, wow.
Look so bizarre. Remember I said Twilight Zone looks like it could have been filmed yesterday? It doesn't look dated. Everything looks fresh and new. But then you see these 1964 commercials, which back then Madison Avenue thought was the cutting edge of hipness.
Yeah.
When you watch them after the Twilight Zone, you're like being thrown back in a time machine when Madison Avenue in 1964 thought this shit was hip. And it is so dated, it'll kill you.
Are there tobacco commercials as well?
What?
Is it before the tobacco commercial and alcohol commercial ban?
The Parodian commercial where they go on for 60 whole seconds about the micronite filter and all this diagrams.
Yeah.
They're hilarious. But they make the Twilight Zone episode that brackets those horrible commercials seem fresher, even fresher than it already is. So we're serving that night. The executive director, when he found out about the symposium, he goes, you know, when I was a kid, my family used to make TV dinners on Friday nights and we would all watch the Twilight Zone. That's when it originally aired, Friday nights. So guess what? The last night of the symposium for number 12 Looks Just Like You in Stepford, we're going to serve TV dinners to every attendee.
Cool.
Nice.
And all during the 4 days, black and white cookies. Get it?
Yeah.
What was Playhouse 90? What was something Serling did before that? But what was that?
That was one of his 90-minute live television shows. Playhouse 90 was the most prestigious of all the 90-minute programs, which were all anthology style. USS Steel Hour. You know, a lot of them were named after the sponsors, like today's football stadiums are named after the sponsors.
Yeah.
But
yes,
whether that was CBS, NBC, I don't know which network had that. But that was the most prestigious of all of them. And I think Requiem for a Heavyweight aired on Playhouse 90. And that won him his second Emmy.
You do presentations for New York Adventure Club or Venture Club?
Yes. So they are an online service that if you go to nyadventureclub.com, pre-pandemic, they were doing live walking tours of New York City famous landmarks and locations. Well, when the pandemic hit, no more live walking tours. They had to switch to webinars, and they needed people that were not only verbal but visual, because in a webinar you can't just talk like we're talking now. Well, I knew somebody that knew the guy that ran New York Adventure Club, and he asked my friend, do you know anybody? My friend was a Frank Sinatra expert and writes books about Sinatra. So he was going to do a webinar about Sinatra. So the New York Adventure Club guy asked him, do you know anybody else that's both visual and verbal? He goes, you got to talk to my friend Arlen Schumer. And I've been doing webinars on American pop culture, comic book history, animation, television, you name it. Ever since. And most of the videos are on my Vimeo channel, which is linked from my website. But I've done Zoom webinars for free. I've done the New York Adventure Club is like now it's $12. And if you can't make it live, you can get the recording for a week for the $12. Because a lot of people, you can't pick the right time. You can't satisfy everybody. People can't make it live, so they'll watch the recording. But yeah, I'm doing a webinar on the 65th anniversary of Twilight Zone on the 18th of September, which is a Wednesday, 5:30 p.m. And it's going to kind of preview the symposium, which in itself will be a week before my book officially comes out. So I'm giving the symposium attendees the chance to buy the first hardcover release like a week ahead of time. So, and the book is from Bear Matter Media. They're a big pop culture publisher, hundreds of books about all different kinds of pop culture. And they publish other books about the Twilight Zone, like the collected scripts of Charles Beaumont and whatever. So it'll be good to be a part of that. And I don't have a hardcover yet in my hands. We're waiting for them to be shipped in time for the symposium. But again, if you go to bearmannermedia.com and put in Twilight Zone, you'll find my book. And eventually I'll be selling signed hardcovers through my website after the book comes out. So that's the plan. But I'm excited about screening The Swimmer in Willoughby. And then I also got a screening in New York City at a cool little cabaret-sized theater on the Upper West Side. The first weekend in October, right after my book comes out. And that'll be the first time that Swimmer will be screened in New York City, I think since it first came out in 1968. And he's got a state-of-the-art, even though it's a cabaret theater, he's got a state-of-the-art projection and sound system. And I've got the Blu-ray of The Swimmer. And guys, I know you haven't seen the movie, but if you just investigate it a little bit, I think you'll be intrigued. And then when you see it, again, we should have a podcast just discussing basically my article. I wrote it all out in my article.
I got your PDF open now of that article, and I've read it, and I'm going to watch The Swimmer. I have it definitely lined up.
Like I said, watch Willoughby first.
Okay.
Because my theory about The Swimmer is if the guy in Willoughby hadn't jumped off the train and killed himself, what happened to the guy in The Swimmer is what would have happened to the guy in Willoughby. And that's all I want to say. I don't want to ruin the film or the story for you, but I would also read John Cheever's short story. Read that first, and then you'll see what's great about the movie. As you know, when a movie is made from a book, they've got to flesh out the book. They've got to open it up, as they say. They've got to add scenes, delete scenes. Yeah. They got to make the movie work as a movie.
I agree. In most cases, they usually butcher the book.
Well, sometimes they do.
And I know of only one example where they actually improved the book, and they did a pretty good job of actually improving the book.
Well, but it's a matter of obviously critics' opinions, people. Yeah. But I always cite Jaws, which was based on a novel by Peter Benchley.
Yeah, that's the example.
I never read the book, but I know about it.
Yep.
There was a whole subplot about Brody's wife having an affair with the Richard Dreyfuss character, Hooper.
Yeah.
Well, Spielberg and his screenwriter, Carl Gottlieb, they just did away with all of that. Now, for whatever reasons, they didn't have enough time.
Was that the book you were talking about, Jay? That was the book he was talking about. So y'all had a Jaws.
Yes, it's the same book, but different part of the story. In the book, and same with you, Arlen. I haven't read the book either. My dad read it, and he took us to see the movie because he read the book. I didn't realize how gory the movie was going to be, but anyway, in the end of the book, the shark attacks.
Hooper dies in the book.
Huh?
Doesn't Hooper die in the book?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think,
okay, so.
But anyway, this is what's happening in the book. The shark attacks Brody in the ship and gets stuck in the pilot's cabin, and Brody swims away. And I think in the book he swims away with Hooper, but I didn't read it. But anyway, the shark goes down with the boat and drowns. That's the end of the book.
I know this.
In the movie, Brody shoves a scuba tank into the shark's face,
Right.
and then hits it with a high-powered rifle from 300 yards, boom, and blows it up. Much better ending than the book, I must say.
Well, listen, that's always a matter of opinion. But
Yeah,
again, when you're doing a movie, everything is bigger.
yeah.
You gotta expand it.
The
In the
ending wasn't big
movie-
enough.
In
Absolutely.
the book, Hooper dies at the end, which might be punishment morally for having the affair.
Yeah.
But in the movie, they decided to make him live. So my point is, when you read The Swimmer, the short story first, which is considered his greatest short story, then watch the movie, and you will see how, because again, adapting a book is hard enough. Adapting a short story to a movie length, that's a whole nother thing. So I would suggest, guys, read the short story first. And by the way, watch the episode Willoughby first, and then read the short story, because the short story was written after the Willoughby episode. So I believe Cheever was watching Twilight Zone, loved
He was
Willoughby,
pilfering from
like
Rod.
everybody else loved it. And in the back of his mind, even though he never gave credit, I believe, and I spell it out in that article, Jeffrey, I believe it was an influence on the short story.
Yeah. He lifted from Rod.
You be the judge.
So is this your main show you get fired up about, or is there anything else that's come out or that you've seen that you get this fiery about?
Well, I recently did a webinar on the new Batman animated series by Bruce Timm.
Is that the newest on Amazon?
Okay, yeah, it's on Amazon. Is it Amazon? Yeah,
Is it-
Amazon Prime.
You're talking about the older one. The older.
No, I think it's on Apple TV, not Amazon. I think
There's a new one called Cape Crusader on Amazon.
It's not on Amazon. It's on Apple TV. Maybe
Okay.
am I right or
Oh,
wrong?
it's on Amazon. It's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay,
okay.
you're right. It's on Amazon. Are you fans of the original Batman animated series?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, I have it. I love it.
Yes.
Yeah, I loved it too. When it first came out, I was so blown away by it. I convinced the trade magazine of the graphic design field called Print to send me out to LA to interview Tim and the other creators like Eric Radomski, the guy that did the dark deco backgrounds. And they agreed because the director of Print, who wasn't a comic fan or a Batman fan, he saw like the first couple cartoons and was blown away by the sophistication of them and everything about them, as we the fans were.
Yeah.
So I wrote one of the first mainstream articles about the Batman animated series that came out in the spring of '93. So I'm a big fan. I'm a big Batman fan. You know, Neil Adams was the great Batman artist. There'd be no Dark Knight today if it wasn't for what Neil Adams did after the TV show had ruined him as a camp clown, if you remember.
Yeah.
I got a love-hate relationship with that TV show, you know.
I've had Joe R. Lansdale. He's talked about him writing some episodes on there on the show. Joe R. Lansdale. Joe R. Lansdale. He's an author. Did Bubba Hotep.
What's the last name?
Lansdale. Lansdale with an L. Joe R.
Yeah,
Lansdale.
that's it. Yeah. So anyway, so this new series came out after all these years. And did you guys see the new series?
I haven't seen the new one yet.
Okay, well, it dropped August 1st, and it's 10 episodes, half hour long. Well, I don't want to say anything because you haven't seen them if you're fans. Again, we should do a podcast discussing that after you've seen them. But I did a whole webinar in August about the original series and then the new series and how they compared and contrasted with each other.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. Well, Mark Hamill was the Joker in that one, right? Yeah.
He was the voice of the Joker. Yeah. Nobody expected Mark Hamill to do the voice. That was a big surprise. But Bruce Timm is the creative. Listen, his style of animation has become the model for all superhero animation ever since. I don't want to say too much about the new series. I don't want to color your impression of it. But again, I would love to do a podcast discussing that if you want to.
Yeah, we can do that. That would be great.
I have a whole history with Batman. I've done webinars on the TV show on the original origin of Batman by Bob Kane and Bill Finger. I've done 2 webinars about Neil Adams' Batman. When he died, Neil Adams, in 2022, I did 9 webinars about his legacy works, and 2 of them were about his Batman works.
What did you think about did you see the Joaquin Phoenix Joker? What did you think about that? It was kind of hard to grow on, but it was good, but it's just kind of hard to settle into.
First of all, judging the trailers, like any film, you got to give the film a chance.
Yeah.
Trailers are one thing, and you can draw an opinion from them, which I have, because how can you not? But in my opinion, trailers reveal too much these days.
Yeah.
Just like reviews. I've stopped reading reviews because the reviewers give away too many plot points.
Yeah.
What I do with a printed review in the New York Times, I'll look at the opening paragraph and the closing paragraph. And if I get a sense that it's a thumbs up, maybe I'll see the movie.
Yeah.
But I don't read reviews. So trailers, they give away too much of the film.
And oftentimes the trailers show all the good parts, and you get there's 2.5 hours of nothing, and then
whatever.
You can see there's 3 minute trailers in there somewhere.
Trailers, they give away too much of the film.
Yeah.
And all I'm saying is, from what I saw, it looks fascinating. It's not a total ridiculous musical like people think. I think they're using the music to dramatize whatever the hell.
Yeah.
First, Joaquin Phoenix is a great actor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What he did as the Joker in the last film was incredible. Lady Gaga is a good to great actress who can really act. She's not one of these bimbos that thinks they can act. And she's got a great voice, unlike some of these bimbos that don't have a great voice. She's got a great voice and she can act. I think it's inspired casting. And to comic book nerds who are already that's not the Harley we know from the comics. Guess what, folks? There's 88 versions of Batman. There's 100 versions of the Joker.
Yeah.
And what is it? That's like 4, or then there's 4 or 5 early serials.
But my point is, the idea of Harley Quinn is the Joker has a girlfriend.
Yeah.
That's it. How you want to interpret that with a character called Harley Quinn is up to you. And there's a ditzy Brooklynese version of her that people think is the only version. By the way, without spoiling too much, the new Cape Crusader animated series, they do their version of Harley Quinn that's completely different from anything in the comics.
Yep.
That's the point of these characters. It's what you do with them. I don't like any of the live action Batmans, but the last movie I really didn't like the version of the Riddler I thought sucked.
Yeah.
So my point is, it's like anything else. All of these characters are open to interpretations by the filmmakers.
Yeah, I was surprised. I was surprised that Joker by Todd Phillips, the Joaquin Phoenix one, is. He also made a crazy ass movie called "Hate It, G.G. Allen" about the punk rock guy that's nuts that I only saw once. I don't think I'd watch it again. It's so.
What's it called?
He made "Hate It" about G.G. Allen.
I know what's it called.
Yeah, he did that movie. It's like a documentary.
What's the title?
Hate It. Hate It. Hate It. The G.G. Allen story.
I never heard of it.
It's like you know who G.G. Allen is? Some crazy punk rock guy that went nuts and did crazy.
Fuji Allen?
G.G. Allen.
Never heard of him.
Don't, because you'll probably not like it.
Allen. Wait. Was G.G. Allen the guy on Saturday Night Live for years, that guitarist?
No, G.G. Allen was a crazy punk rock guy that cut himself on stage and ate poop and crazy as hell, crazy.
What year? 70s?
Yeah, you have a bit of an echo coming off of your mic, Jeff.
Jeff, what era was G.G. Allen? 70s, 80s? When?
Let me look it up. Hold
The
on.
original punk era was the late 70s. Was he?
I'm
Was
looking
he
it up.
OG punk?
19. Wait. Hold on. I'm looking up the years. I'm trying to figure out what that weird echo is.
Whatever.
Let's see a
You
second.
have 2 mics on over there?
I'm gonna check.
Because it sounds like I'm echoing through your computer.
No, it's not. So let me mute. No, Gigi Allen, I think it was in the 90s. It was like a punk rock thing. And in the documentary, it's pretty gross. It's not something I'd watch again. But Todd Phillips made that movie.
Todd Phillips made that
Yes.
when he was a nobody filmmaker?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so what?
Well, I'm just saying it's about a guy that gets on stage and eats his own poop.
I know, but what does that got to do with the Joker movie?
I was just surprised he made that. That's my point.
Yeah, listen, we all have creative skeletons in our closet, you know. Sometimes young filmmakers have to do shitty movies because it's an opportunity that they need to learn on. You can't judge all artists by their early works, you know.
Yeah, well, you can't necessarily judge them by their last works either. The famous artist Roger Mapplethorpe is a brilliant photographer. Really, I mean, like Ansel Adams quality photographer. But at the end of his career, what he did mostly was he bought canvases and he wiped feces on them, like his own poop.
Who wiped
this artist, Roger Mapplethorpe, he actually physically wiped poop on canvases, framed them, and then sold them as art.
I don't know about that. He was a photographer.
That's what I said. He was a photographer. And he's a good photographer, but at the end of his career, he made.
I don't know if he got that right. I don't think that's Robert Mapplethorpe.
Yeah, is Robert or Roger? Yeah, I can't remember his first name. Yeah.
Oh, I'm telling you, that's not Robert Mapplethorpe. You got to be confused with somebody else. Mapplethorpe was a gay photographer.
Yeah, that's the guy I'm talking about.
I know, but I never heard of Mapplethorpe doing excrement on canvases.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was.
And if that's your only way of characterizing him, I think you have a bit of a hidden agenda there.
Look him up. I don't know. I don't have a clue. I don't know. Look it up. Jay and prove it. I don't know. I have no idea. But let's move on to something else for sure. Besides that,
you brought it up.
I know. I was just saying it was weird that he made the punk movie about that guy because it was weird.
He brought it up.
Yeah. But so what's going on in the future as far as books concerned? Are you going to stay on Serling, or is there anything dream project that you'd like to work on next?
I do have another book. I'm a Bruce Springsteen historian. I was art director of his first fan magazine when I was at RISD. And I've been working on essays about his unreleased material. You know, Bruce is like Dylan, the Grateful Dead, Neil Young. You know, they've got more unreleased material than released material. Now, Dylan has been putting out what were called official bootlegs. You know, CBS said if you can't beat them, join them. And they started putting out what was called the official bootleg series. The Grateful Dead put out their material. Neil Young puts out his material. Bruce has put out some of his unreleased material, doesn't write liner notes. So basically, through the liner notes to his unreleased material, I've actually created a sort of alternative history of Bruce Springsteen. I'm just going to reach back here. So it's called Brilliant Disguise, Bruce Springsteen's Greatest Hits You've Never Heard. I'm trying to get the glare off the cover.
Oh, looks good.
That's a photograph that you wouldn't expect is Bruce Springsteen, but it is. Nice. And through this book, which Bear Manor Media is also publishing next spring, is the 50th anniversary of Born to Run. And it'll be coming out in time for that. And it's sort of an alternative history of Bruce Springsteen that runs parallel with his official history, but is also significantly different. Maybe even, quote, better if that's possible. And, you know, he's a legacy act. As you can see, he's still selling out soccer stadiums. And he was the original punk, you know, and he doesn't get the credit for it.
I remember my cassette of Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA. I probably stole it from Columbia House somehow.
Yep, Columbia House. We all fell victim to the Columbia House lure, right? Like $1.50 albums or something.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Jeffrey, I can't believe I haven't thought of Columbia House in a long time.
I think I made up names. I better shut up before I get a court summon.
Well, no, but I mean, if you're into punk, you should realize that they were calling Bruce a punk in 1973 with quotes around the word punk. And pre-Ramones, Bruce was wearing a black leather jacket with sneakers and ripped jeans and a ripped T-shirt, while the Ramones were still students in Long Island in high school. But Bruce doesn't get the credit for bringing rock and roll back down to its roots. You know, there are two streams of punk. There's the Sex Pistols punk, and then there's the Clash punk, Elvis Costello punk. Bruce didn't influence the Sex Pistols, but he influenced the Clash. You know, Joe Strummer, he wrote his biography in the year 2000, a couple years before he died. Bruce, you know, they talk about the Ramones as influencing punk because the Ramones did a European tour of England in 1976, a year before punk hit. And critics claim that that tour was seen by all the early punks, and that's why punk happened in England the following year.
Wow.
Well, one of the things the critics miss is that guess who toured in England the year before the Ramones? A guy named Bruce Springsteen. He went on a mini European tour after Born to Run came out, Stockholm and 2 nights in England. Well, everybody who was rock and roll royalty in England went to those 2 shows. Elvis Costello, when he was still Declan McManus, went there. Andrew Loog Oldham, the first manager of the Stones, was there. What's his name? Peter Gabriel, when he was still with Genesis, was there.
Oh, cool.
Seeing the shows at the Hammersmith Odeon made Peter Gabriel quit Genesis. Declan McManus saw those shows, and to this day, he says Born to Run is the greatest American rock and roll song ever. And Joe Strummer, in his autobiography, wrote that he was in an early band before the Clash. I forget what they were called. Something with an R. I forget. It was the something R with a, plural. I forget what the R was. But it was an early whatever band it was, whatever Strummer was doing before the Clash. And he brought his manager along with him at the time to see one of those shows at the Hammersmith Odeon. And he writes about this in his book. And he points to Bruce up on stage, and he elbows his manager. And he says, that guy is doing exactly what I want to do on stage. Again, Exhibit A for the defense. Does Bruce get the credit like Iggy Pop of being an early punk? No. Does Bruce get the credit like the Ramones get the credit? No. But guess what, folks? Bruce was the first punk.
I saw Bruce on an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm not too long ago.
Yeah,
that was good.
Well, that was mimicking when David Letterman ended his NBC show in 1993 after 11 years. He closes the show by saying, folks, I've had some great acts on my show these past 11 years, which is true. And then he said, but there's one act that I've always wanted to have on, but could never get on. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that ends tonight. Please welcome Bruce Springsteen.
Nice.
I think you could find it on YouTube, but I did a webinar. It's on my Vimeo channel, a live retrospective of Bruce's greatest film and video performances. And he came out and did Glory Days with the band and brought the house down. Enough said?
Enough said, for sure. Well, we got about 5 minutes. It's been an amazing show. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
so
thanks
much
for
you coming on.
Babble. Jay, I hope I haven't been too rough on you.
You've been rough on us, but we're okay. We've survived. I've had a weird head.
It's all for your better. You'll thank me one day for all the great shit I've turned you on to.
I got her balls roasted over Twilight Zone. That's I'm good with it. I've had a weird headache for like a few days. I'm trying to it might be blood pressure crap, but I've loved it. I appreciate it. It's been a good one. What are your links and everything?
Okay, so basically the big link, go to arlenschumer.com and make sure you spell my name right. That's got my illustration works. You can buy a copy of my book about comic book history. My Twilight Zone book is up, but there's a Twilight Zone page on my website. But then go to the westportlibrary.com for information. If you're in the New York, Connecticut area, come to the symposium. You'll love it. And then in terms of pre-ordering my book, you can go to bearmanormedia.com, put in Twilight Zone in the search, and you'll see my book, The 5 Themes of the Twilight Zone. So, guys, thank you for this opportunity to blather. I hope you've enjoyed as much as I have.
We've enjoyed it. It's like our own.
I hope it was as good for you as it was for me.
Yeah, it definitely was. I mean, I knew if it came down to trivia with Twilight Zone, I knew I would get my ass kicked no matter what venue it would be.
Listen, there's a lot of things you didn't know that you kept saying I saw it, but I forgot it.
Yeah, well, believe me, I probably did see it. I watched a lot of television. It just didn't.
One of those bullshit supplements that claim to improve the memory, right? Isn't there some?
My memory is bad.
No, my memory is really that bad. I've seen that many TV shows. I don't know.
Jay, if all you get out of this podcast is
marijuana,
it's to stop using.
It's even before that. I swear, I've bought movies. I'm like, I've never seen this, and I plug it in. I start playing. I'm like, wait a minute, I have seen this.
Okay. If all you get out of this podcast is to stop saying I saw it, but I don't remember anything, then it will have been to good use. And I say that with love.
And watch it again, and then
I appreciate it. But yeah, I honestly, I do watch a lot of stuff, and a lot of it doesn't.
Yeah, stick. I watch a lot of stuff too, but I don't go around saying, I saw that, but I don't remember anything. What are we supposed to do with that?
Well, especially if I saw something when I was a kid. I mean, the last time I watched The Twilight Zone was probably 30, 40 years ago.
Contribute to a discussion by saying I saw it, but I don't remember anything. What good is that? What are we supposed to do with that information?
Well, you definitely got me on the titles. Like I said, I do not know the titles of the episodes.
I don't believe you saw the thing either, because if you saw it, you'd remember it.
Not necessarily. Like I said, that were 30, 40 years ago when I last saw those shows on a regular basis.
He's doubling down.
Well, we appreciate it so much. My big thing, we only got a few minutes. I love comic books, but my thing is, like, you want to read Batman, there's like 40 Batman titles. You do Spider-Man's like 40 Spider. You're like, where do I start?
Seek out. There's a couple of Neil Adams collections in terms of Batman.
Yeah,
Neil Adams, in my opinion, did the best Batman. The stories were mostly without Robin. Thank God. I never liked Robin.
Me neither.
They're without the Batmobile and the Batcave and all that bat bullshit. My Batman does not tuck a cape under his ass and get into a car. He swings on a rope, and somehow shows up on all different ends of Gotham City. I don't know how.
One of the big
Batmobile. None of the Neil Adams stories, with the exception of a handful, have a Batmobile.
Yeah, I love a lot of the
Batman solo stories. And nobody drew Batman like Neil Adams, period.
He's the king for sure. All right, Arlen Schumer, everybody.
Listen, I hope
appreciate
I my bridge on this podcast and that you have me back to discuss The Swimmer, the Batman animated series, and anything else you want to talk about.
Definitely have you back on. We appreciate it. We like fiery guests. It wakes us up for sure.
Yeah.
If I could be reimbursed for my passion, I'd be the richest man on earth,
Yeah, I appreciate your fire for sure.
Thanks, man. Anytime.
We appreciate it. We'll stay in touch. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks,
You're listening to United Public Radio, 107.7 FM, New Orleans. Everybody have a good weekend. I've been watching that new Rings of Power. It's not bad. I don't get why people hate it. It's not like as good as the Peter Jackson, but I like it. It's good. It's still good.
Watch The Swimmer.
Yeah, I got that one. I'm trying to find a way.
That's your homework assignment.
I'm trying not to torrent it, but I may lose out.
Listen, how about this, guys? Watch the Batman animated series, the new one, and watch The Swimmer and read the short story, and then let's do another podcast where we discuss those things. And this time, Jay, you'll be able to say, I saw it and I remember it.
Or maybe not.
Well, that's a whole nother story then. I'll have what he's having.
You eggplant.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good weekend, everybody. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week. Take care.
Good
Take
night.
care. Bye-bye. All right, everybody. You're listening to United Public Radio 107.7 FM New Orleans. Everybody have a good week.